Most people saw a leather cut, a beard like a briar patch, and forearms wrapped in ink, and they crossed the parking lot without deciding to. They saw danger. They saw trouble. They saw the last man on earth they'd hand a child to. Eli Mercer was 8 years old, and he did not cross to the other side. He limped through the rain-slicked lot of the Blue Ridge Fuel and Diner on Interstate 77 with one shoe soaked through and his ankle already swelling under his sock. And he walked straight past 2 truckers and a state trooper's cruiser to reach the biggest man in the building, a Hell's Angel sitting alone at the counter with his back to the wall. He didn't ask for help. He didn't ask for a phone. He climbed onto the stool beside him, out of breath, rain dripping off a coat 2 sizes too big, and said the only thing he had left to say. "Please pretend you're my dad." Gideon Marsh set his coffee down and looked at the boy for a long moment before he answered. Not at his face first, at the limp, at the way his eyes kept cutting back toward the door, at the small hand already gripping a fistful of Gideon's sleeve like it belonged there. Whatever Gideon said next would bring 178 motorcycles to a truck stop that had never seen anything like it before. The Blue Ridge Fuel and Diner sat off exit 42, the way a lot of places along Interstate 77 sat. Built for people passing through, not people staying. A single strip of fluorescent light between 2 dark stretches of highway. Rain had been coming down since noon, hard enough that the neon sign in the window buzzed and flickered every time the wind pushed against it. Inside, the smell was burnt coffee and wet vinyl and the particular staleness of a fryer that had been running since 5 that morning. A radio behind the counter played something low and forgettable. 2 truckers sat at the far end, not talking, and a waitress named Donna wiped the same 6 feet of counter for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, because there was nothing else to do. Gideon Marsh had been sitting at that counter for 20 minutes, waiting out the worst of the storm before he got back on the road, when the boy climbed onto the stool beside him. He was 61 years old, built long rather than wide, with a beard gone the color of old rope and forearms carrying 30 years of ink that had faded into something softer than it once was. His cut carried the winged death's head of the Hell's Angels and a stack of patches that told anyone who could read them exactly how long he'd been riding and how far. Below his collarbone, stitched small enough that most people never asked, was a single line of script, a name and 2 dates 11 years apart. People did not sit next to Gideon Marsh by accident. Truckers moved their coffee down the counter. Donna refilled his cup without being asked and did not linger to chat. It was not that he was unfriendly. It was that he carried a stillness that made most people feel, correctly, that they were interrupting something. He had been on the road since 6 that morning, headed toward a chapter toy run 3 days out. 200 bikes, wrapped gifts strapped to sissy bars, delivered to a children's hospital the same week every December, a tradition older than most of the riders doing it now. He wanted tonight exactly one thing, to wait out the rain and get back on 77 before dark. He did not get that either. Instead, he got an 8-year-old boy, soaked through, gripping his sleeve like a man overboard gripping a rope, asking him to be somebody he wasn't. Gideon set his coffee down slowly. He had learned, the hard way and later than he should have, that a man could spend a lifetime riding past exactly the kind of trouble that mattered and call it minding his own business. He was not going to do that tonight. He looked past the boy first, out through the rain-streaked window toward the pumps, where a gray sedan sat idling with its lights on and no one visible behind the wheel. Then he looked down at the boy's ankle, swollen enough to show through a wet sock. Then, longest of all, at his eyes, which kept flicking toward the door the way an animal's does when it has already located every exit in a room. Okay, Gideon said. "I'm your dad." "What's going on, son?" Before we get to what Gideon found out, if you're new to this channel, hit subscribe so you don't lose this one in the feed, and drop where you're watching from down in the comments below. I read every single one, and it means more than you'd guess to see how far these stories travel. Now, back to the diner on exit 42. Because the answer this 8-year-old boy was about to give would change what Gideon Marsh had planned to do for the rest of the night. Eli's mother, Renee, had pulled off the highway 20 minutes earlier for gas and a bathroom break on the 6-hour drive to her own mother's house in Charleston, a trip they made most winters, and a trip that had gone fine. Exactly fine. Until a gray sedan appeared behind them 3 exits back and stayed there. Eli had recognized it before his mother did. He recognized the crack in the windshield first, then the man's silhouette behind the wheel, and by the time Renee said, quietly, "That can't be," Eli already had his hand on the door handle. His father, Curtis Mercer, was not supposed to be within 500 feet of him. A judge in Kanawha County had signed the paperwork himself, 18 months earlier, after a night Eli mostly remembered in pieces. His mother's voice through a door, a chair overturned, the particular quiet of the house afterward. Eli did not remember all of it. He remembered enough. When Curtis pulled into the same lot and got out of his car calling Eli's name in the easy, friendly voice he always used in public, Eli did not wait to see what came next. He was out of the car and running before his mother could stop him, and it was the wet pavement, not his father, that caught him. His ankle rolling under him hard enough that he heard something in it complain before the pain arrived a half-second later. He kept limping anyway, straight through the door of the only building with lights on, past 2 truckers who didn't look up, toward the one person in the room who looked big enough that nobody would try to argue with him. He still had, in his coat pocket, a rubber band bracelet his mother had braided for him the week the divorce was final. The same 3 colors every time she made a new one when the old one wore through. He touched it now, under the counter, the way he touched it whenever the wrong kind of quiet started building in a room. He did not tell Gideon Marsh all of it. He was 8. He did not have all of it in words yet. He only had the parts that mattered enough to say out loud. "My dad's not supposed to find me," Eli said. "If he sees I'm alone, he'll take me. If he thinks you're my dad, maybe he won't." The door chimed 30 seconds later. Curtis Mercer walked in wiping rain off a jacket that cost more than anything else in that diner. Sunglasses pushed up into hair combed a little too carefully for a man supposedly stopping for gas. He had the kind of face that photographed well in courtrooms, open, reasonable. The face of a man who believed, and had convinced several judges to half believe, that he was the one being wronged. He scanned the room once, found the booth by the window empty, found Renee's car outside, and then found his son sitting at the counter beside a stranger in a leather cut, and something moved behind his eyes before his mouth caught up and smoothed it into a smile. "Eli, hey bud," he said it warmly, the practiced warmth of a man who had learned that volume made people nervous and quiet charm did not. "You scared me, running off like that. Come on, let's get you back to your mom." He did not look at Gideon. Men like Curtis Mercer rarely looked directly at anyone they hadn't already decided how to handle. Eli did not move from the stool. His hand found Gideon's sleeve again and held on. "He's not supposed to be near me," Eli whispered, quiet enough that it was almost lost under the radio. The judge said. "The judge," Curtis repeated, still smiling, still gentle for whoever might be listening. "Buddy, that's grown-up stuff. I want to say hello to my son." He took a step closer, one hand already reaching, and his voice dropped into a register meant for a much smaller audience of one. Don't embarrass me in front of people, Eli. You know how this goes. Eli went still in a way that had nothing to do with obedience and everything to do with a body that had learned, at 8 years old, exactly what came after that particular sentence. Gideon Marsh had not said a word since Curtis Mercer walked through the door. He had, however, noticed everything. The way Eli's grip on his sleeve had tightened rather than loosened. The way the boy's breathing had changed the instant that sentence landed. The way a father who genuinely missed his son might have crossed the room in a hurry, and the way this one had crossed it slow and careful and entirely for an audience. Gideon had not decided anything yet, but something in him had already stopped being undecided. Come on, Eli. Now? Curtis's hand closed around the boy's forearm, not hard enough for the two truckers at the end of the counter to look up from their plates, hard enough that Eli's breath caught and his ankle buckled when he tried to slide off the stool. Neither trucker looked up. Donna, behind the register, went busy with a coffee pot that did not need refilling. That was the truck stop, Gideon thought. Not cruel. Silent, in all the ways that mattered. Because getting involved with a man who called himself somebody's father was the kind of thing people paid dearly to avoid. You're hurting him, Gideon said. It was the first thing he'd said since Curtis walked in. He's my son. Curtis didn't look at him. This isn't your business. Friend made it mine when he sat down. Donna, mid-wipe behind the counter, froze with the rag still in her hand. Curtis's smile thinned, but held. Cute. You gonna fight me over a custody arrangement you know nothing about? Real smart. Biker getting involved in a family thing. He pulled again, and this time Eli's bad ankle gave entirely, and he would have gone down onto the tile if Gideon's free hand hadn't come up under his arm to catch him. Not fast, not dramatic. Only there. The way a man catches something he has decided he isn't going to let fall. Renee came through the door at that exact moment, breathless. Rain-soaked, having circled the lot twice, looking for her son, and the sound she made when she saw Curtis's hand on Eli's arm was small and involuntary, and without words. Curtis turned toward her voice, and for half a second his grip loosened. And Eli, small and fast in the way of children who have practiced this exact moment in their heads more times than any child should have to, twisted free and pressed himself into the space behind Gideon's stool, one hand fisted in the back of Gideon's cut. Eli, Curtis said, and his voice had lost its warmth entirely now, gone flat and cold, in a way that made two more people in the diner finally look up from their plates. Get over here. The boy did not move. He stood behind a stranger in a leather cut, trembling. His rubber band bracelet twisted 3 times around his fingers, and said nothing at all. Gideon Marsh set his coffee down. Slowly, the way he did most things, the mug making almost no sound against the counter. He stood, unhurried, and the stool did not so much as scrape. Because he had spent 30 years learning how to move a large body through a room without disturbing anything that didn't need disturbing. He was a full head taller than Curtis Mercer had accounted for. There's a restraining order, Gideon said. You know that. I know that, and in about 10 seconds, everyone in this diner is going to know it too. This is a family matter. Curtis's voice climbed a half step. You don't know anything about this family. Don't need to. Gideon's voice did not rise to meet it. Boyd told me his piece. Judge told you yours. You're not listening to either one. Curtis stepped closer, jabbing a finger toward Gideon's chest without touching it, the first plainly foolish thing he'd done since walking through the door. You want to explain to a judge why some Hell's Angel got physical with a father trying to see his own kid? Wasn't planning on getting physical. Gideon didn't blink. Wasn't planning on much of anything. Was going to stand here until you left. And if I don't? Then, we'll be here a while. Renee had reached Eli by now, both arms around him, and the sound coming out of her was the particular quiet crying of a person trying not to make a scene while everything in her wants to. Donna had come around from behind the register, phone already up, and the two truckers had finally, fully, turned around in their seats. Curtis looked around the diner, at the phone, at the truckers, at his own son pressed into a stranger's back like the stranger was the safer bet. And something in his composure went from smooth to careful, the way ice goes from solid to something you can hear cracking underneath your weight. "Fine," he said. "Fine, I'll call my lawyer. We'll see what a judge thinks of a biker gang intimidating a father." "Go ahead," Gideon said. "Call him. I'll wait." Curtis pulled his phone out, thumb jabbing at the screen harder than the screen required, and it was clear from the way his eyes kept darting up, checking whether his bluff was landing, that no call was actually being placed. "You think this ends with you being the hero?" His voice had gone thin, reaching for a kind of menace it no longer had the weight to carry. "I know people. I'll make your life difficult. Doubt it." Gideon almost smiled. "But you should hurry up deciding whatever you're deciding. Company's coming." "What company?" "Chapter's headed this way for a toy run. Called it in the second the boy sat down next to me." Gideon nodded toward the window, toward the dark stretch of 77 beyond the rain. "About 4 minutes out, by my count." Curtis laughed, short and humorless. "More of you people." "Great, more than you'd like," Gideon said. And something in the stillness of his face made Donna, behind the counter, lower her phone an inch and go quiet in a way she hadn't been all night. For a moment nobody in the diner spoke. The whole room had gone silent except for the rain against the window in long gray sheets, and the radio kept playing something low and forgettable, and underneath both of those sounds there was, faintly, a third one that had not been there a minute earlier. A rumble. Low, at the edge of hearing, coming from somewhere past the dark curve of the exit ramp. Eli, still pressed into the back of Gideon's cut, felt it before he understood what it was. A vibration through the floor tile, through the counter, through his own chest, and looked up at his mother with an expression that was, for the first time since the gray sedan appeared 3 exits back, something other than afraid. Engines. That was the word Eli would use to describe it to his grandmother the next morning, though it did not come close to covering what happened next. The rumble built the way a storm builds, low, and then lower, then suddenly filling the whole parking lot at once, rattling the window glass hard enough that Donna's coffee pot buzzed against its burner. Curtis's head snapped toward the door, and whatever composure he had left broke completely the moment he understood what he was hearing. They came off the exit ramp in a long, unbroken line, headlights cutting through the rain, and they did not stop coming. 40, 80 more, the Blue Ridge Fuel and Diners lot, built for a dozen cars and 2 big rigs, filled with motorcycles the way a stadium fills before a game, fast and loud, and then, all at once, entirely still. 178 of them, the county sheriff's report would say the next day, though nobody in that parking lot was counting yet. The engines killed almost together. No one spoke. No one revved for show. 178 riders in wet leather stood beside their bikes in the rain, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing that Diner had heard in years. A woman walked in first, older than Gideon, gray hair pulled back tight, a road captain's patch of her own. She crossed the room the way Gideon had crossed 6 feet of it minutes earlier, and found his eyes before anyone else's. "You good, Gideon?" she asked. I'm good, Marisol, Gideon said. He's not. He nodded toward Curtis. And the boys had a rough night. Marisol's eyes moved to Eli for the first time, and stayed there, the swollen ankle, the bracelet twisted around small fingers, the way he was still holding on to a stranger's cut like it was the only solid thing in the room, and whatever hard-won calm lived in her face gave way, slightly, to something softer. "Hey, buddy," she said, crouching to his height. "You did good getting yourself somewhere safe. That was smart. Are you going to help me?" Eli whispered. "Already here, aren't we?" Marisol said. Curtis Mercer looked out at 178 motorcycles filling a parking lot he had nowhere left to drive out of, and did not wait for the sheriff, who was, in fact, already 4 minutes out. He sat down at the nearest booth instead, and did not say another word until the deputies arrived. The deputies who arrived 11 minutes later did not need much explaining. A dozen witnesses, 1 restraining order on file, and a swollen ankle told most of the story before anyone opened their mouth. Curtis Mercer was arrested that night for violating the order, and for what the responding officer's report would later describe, plainly, as an attempt to remove a minor from his custodial parent by force. Renee drove the rest of the way to Charleston that night with her son asleep against the window, his ankle wrapped in gauze from the first aid kit behind the diner counter, his rubber band bracelet still wound 3 times around his fingers. Gideon Marsh did not go to the hospital with them, and did not ask to be thanked twice for something he considered, in the end, a fairly small decision made at exactly the right moment. He finished his coffee, paid Donna for it despite her waving him off, and walked back out into the rain to his bike. He made the toy run 3 days later, same as every year. 200 bikes and a truck full of wrapped presents pulling into a children's hospital parking lot at 9 in the morning. If anyone noticed that Gideon Marsh smiled a little more easily that year, standing in the ward with kids stacking presents around him, nobody mentioned it out loud. Some things a person is allowed to keep for himself. Eli Mercer still has that bracelet. He wears a new one now, one his grandmother helped him braid, but he keeps the old one in a drawer, because his mother told him some things are worth keeping even after they've done their job. He does not remember every detail of that night in the diner. He remembers enough. He remembers that a stranger with a scarred face and 30 years of ink looked at an 8-year-old boy asking him to be somebody he wasn't, and said yes without hesitating. If this story reached you tonight, if you believe a child should never have to talk a stranger into protecting him, share it with someone who needs the reminder that help sometimes looks exactly like the thing you were taught to be afraid of. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And down in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, and if a stranger ever stepped up for you or someone you love, type protector below so Gideon knows it mattered.